The growing violence in Afghanistan is a reminder that the fighting that started there in 2001 is far from over. We go now to CBS News Chief Foreign Affairs Correspondent Lara Logan, who is with U.S. troops in Helmand Province. Lara, you have made many trips to Afghanistan. What is it like there now on the eve of the elections?
Well, there is an atmosphere of fear hanging over this election now. Afghans are ready to vote in the next few days. This is their second presidential election. But just yesterday, there was a massive car bomb outside NATO headquarters in the capital, Kabul. And this, for Afghans, is a demonstration, the Taliban trying to show that they can strike anytime they want to, anywhere they want to. And they have threatened to disrupt the election at all costs. They won't be able to stop everybody from going to the polls. But there is concern that particularly here where I am in the south of the country, they will, through fear and intimidation, be able to prevent people from voting. And if they can do that in significant numbers, then that is a problem for the credibility of the election. And what people were telling us here is, they were telling the Marines when we were out on patrol yesterday, is that we can't go and vote because your finger is stained with indelible ink. And if the Taliban see that, they say they're going to chop off our heads, they're going to kill us. And they know there are only a few polling stations that are open in the south. In some areas, they couldn't even open polling stations. It's so dangerous. So this is one of the major problems that Afghans face. And there is now some concern about what exactly the Taliban have in store over the next few days and on voting day itself. The U.S. will be securing the roads. The Afghans will be securing the polling stations. And there will not be a visible U.S. presence. They want this to look like an Afghan election. They want people to believe that it's an Afghan election, although many Afghans believe that it's the U.S. that will decide the outcome and that their vote doesn't really count. Harry?
And joining us now to talk about U.S. strategy there, former Senator Chuck Hagel and former Congressman Lee Hamilton joining. Thank you very much for taking the time to be with us today. July was the deadliest month so far for U.S. and NATO forces in Afghanistan. The Taliban effectively control almost half of the country as the United States continues to aggressively engage the Taliban. What are your greatest concerns? Mr. Hamilton, let me start with you.
Afghanistan is fiendishly complex, a very, very difficult policy challenge for us. I think we're at a pivotal point. We're going to have to decide how hard, how big to go in or to come back a little bit. My major concern at the moment is that we put aside our assumptions and examine kind of from the beginning, are we doing the right thing there? What are our objectives? How much are we willing to pay to reach those objectives? Are there alternatives other than a massive increase in troops and money into the region? Can we protect the American national interest? Can we protect Americans with something less than may be on the horizon here? Those are the questions on my mind.
Senator Hagel, General McChrystal is due to report soon back on as the transition that's taken place under his leadership. We're hearing rumors he's been told not to ask for more troops, but the wish list is said to include as many as 10,000. Anthony Cordesman this week said there ought to be 45,000 more. This is a very expensive proposition in terms of both blood and treasure. Do we know we're making the right investment?
Well, I go back to what Lee laid out in answering your question, which I think he has captured it exactly right. In addition to what Lee has said, I would add this. What are the achievable objectives? And that ties to your question, how do we know we're making the right decisions? First, we have an election Thursday. I would expect that General McChrystal's analysis will come in shortly thereafter. My understanding is there'll be a part 2 to that. Then he'll have recommendations following that, which will obviously address additional troops if he's going to ask for more. But I think also we have to keep in mind that this fall we will have been in Afghanistan 9 years. And we've got to identify very clearly, what is this objective? Is it nation building? Now, if it's nation building, and General Ambassador Eikenberry, as we know, has sent a recent memo to Secretary Clinton saying, I need $2.5 billion more in non-military plus military, then we are getting very deep into something here that we don't do very well, we don't understand. This area of the world is at the crossroads of the most dangerous, complicated, combustible region on Earth. You've got 3 nuclear powers all bordering each other, and aspiring nuclear power in Iran. Pakistan is connected to the future of Afghanistan. Regional strategic concepts have to be laid out in this, and it isn't just the military. I fear that we could find ourselves bogged down, drifting dangerously deeper and deeper into a situation where that becomes very difficult to get out, and we become isolated. You know, the Dutch are coming out next year. The Canadians are looking at coming out in 2011. The British is...
They're up against the wall.
With this election. So
right.
I'm willing to wait to see what McChrystal says, but I think Gates's points, Secretary Gates, have been very important points that he's made, because one of the points he continues to make is the more we load in American forces, are we being perceived more and more, wider and wider as an occupation force? If the people turn and we can't get the people back, it won't make any difference whether we put 200,000 troops in.
Right.
I mean, that was a difficult lesson in Vietnam.
Point well taken. And the question then becomes, if in fact too much time has transpired for the United States to let its interests seep in there, if too much time if the time has been forfeited, let me go back to what Senator Hagel said. Can we afford not to be there, though? If the stakes are as high as they are, can we afford not to be there?
If you keep your focus on what I think is the core national interest, protecting Americans, dismantling Al-Qaeda, we have to achieve that objective. We do not want to threaten the security and lives of the American people. Can we achieve that without what Chuck is talking about, nation building? I do not personally think we can modernize Afghanistan. There are historical, political, cultural, economic forces that are massive in that country, and we can't turn them around. One of the great questions of American foreign policy is always its sustainability. We get excited about a place, we're willing to put billions of dollars into it in the short term, but you cannot solve Afghanistan's problems in the short term. All of the experts are telling us decades. So the question, Chuck, is, are your former colleagues and mine willing to put billions and billions and billions of dollars over not a year or 2 or 3, but decades into Afghanistan? Let's protect the core interest.
Do you feel like the White House has clear objectives here? Richard Holbrooke was in a forum this week. Somebody asked him what success is, and when he said, well, we'll know it when we see it.
I don't think that's a particularly reassuring answer, but I think that is indicative, though, to this foggy, vaporous idea that's still floating around out there as to what is, to Lee's point, and he's exactly right, what is not only the achievable core objective, but what protects our national interest. Right. You know, I mentioned Pakistan. That area has never been governable. Now, that doesn't mean that it can't get better, but I'm not so sure it's wise to get our army bogged down in a situation where by the end of this year, right now on the board, including NATO and other countries like Australia have troops in there, we're going to have at least 100,000 troops in there. We're probably tripling the USAID and economic development going in there. You drift and drift and you go deeper and wider, and all of a sudden a year or 2 years goes by and you're in a lot of trouble. Now, how do you unwind this? Because there are ramifications to that for our standing in the world.
Congressman Hamilton, final question. Election happens this week. Does it matter if Karzai ends up back in office? It will likely be a runoff, but it seems if it were to happen, he'll end up back in office. Does it matter?
I don't know much about the alternatives to Karzai. I've been disappointed in Karzai's leadership. But if our goal is to create a legitimate, reasonable, accountable, capable Afghan government, we're going to be there a long, long time, I believe. Does it matter? I suppose it does in who wins an election. My view is that the elections kind of delayed us to try to achieve our objectives. Maybe it's a necessary delay, but we're going to have to work with that Afghan government even with limited objectives that Chuck and I have talked about, we're going to have to work with them. And so, in a sense, we'll work with whoever wins.
As always, Harry, just like Iraq, it'll be the people themselves of that region that will determine the fate and outcome of their country.
Very sobering stuff, Senator Hagel. Congressman, thank you so much for being here.